This cinema is happened the old age 1945, accompanying World War II in Europe bearing currently done. Moment of truth when Denmark is subsequently freed from German takeover. We are therefore made acquainted to a sergeant chosen Carl Leopold Rasmussen. The one is vigilant. The German convicts of war return to the Danish army, subsequently 5 age influential in the British Parachute Regiment. During this, Carl spots individual of the German captives winning a Danish flag that enrages him. As a result, he angrily beats him up and snatches the flag continuously. In the next setting, we visualize the young German captives accomplish a field place. They are talked by Carl's commander Captain Eb Jensen from the Danish Pioneer Corps. Eb explains that they are brought to Denmark for only one purpose: to clear Denmark's west coast where the Germans had buried thousands of landmines in the sand. The prisoners are warned not to expect any sympathy from the Danes, because Denmark is not their friend. Following this briefing, the training begins, where the young prisoners are instructed on how to defuse the landmines using their bare hands. This emphasizes the extreme danger involved, as any small mistakes would lead to death. As part of their training, the young German soldiers are provided with real landmines and are tasked with carrying out the defusing process in an abandoned bunker. A prisoner named Hermann Moorbach volunteers to go first and successfully defuses a mine. Subsequently, all the German prisoners take their turns to defuse, but one of them fails, resulting in a fatal explosion. Upon completing their training, the German soldiers are sent to a small hut containing a room with several beds. Once there, they are approached by Sergeant Carl, who expresses his anger at the war and decides to treat the young prisoners without sympathy. He then lines them up and asks for their names one by one. Amidst this, he stumbles upon the twin brothers, Werner and Ernst Lesner. Ernst instantly gets a slap from the sergeant for answering on behalf of his brother. Following this, Carl leads the prisoners to the sand dunes, revealing an area marked with black flags. He reveals that a whopping 45,000 mines are hidden there. He then announces that the young prisoners will only be allowed to return home only after defusing all of these mines. Furthermore, he informs them that if they manage to defuse 6 landmines per hour and save themselves from blowing up, they can anticipate going home within 3 months. Carl also provides them with a map, explaining that each zone is assigned a number, and instructs the boys to keep the map constantly updated. With this information in mind, the young soldiers start their work. They lie down on the sand dunes and search for the landmines before carefully defusing them. After their work, the boys rest in their modest hut. In order to keep the team optimistic, one of the boys named Sebastian talks about his plans after returning home. In the meantime, the twin brothers notice a local girl playing with her doll across the street. Seeing that the girl has food, Ernst approaches her and tries to befriend her. However, their interaction is abruptly interrupted when the girl's mother shows up and scolds her for talking to the Germans. In the midst of this, Ernst manages to steal a piece of bread from the child's toy cart, which he later shares with his brother. As night falls, Carl instructs everyone to retreat to their beds and secures the hut doors before departing. The following day, the young soldiers continue their toil, but circumstances start getting hard as they are not given food due to post-war shortages. As a result of this, the Germans begin to suffer from malnourishment, making it difficult to deal with the mines. Despite this adversity, they are forced to keep working without any breaks in between. Later that night, a guy named Helmut sneaks out of the hut in search of some food. A fellow group member named Wilhelm notices him, but he opts to remain silent. On the next day, Werner, on behalf of his brother, requests Carl for permission for a leave because Ernst isn't feeling well and is continuously vomiting. However, the sergeant declines their plea, compelling them to continue their labor. Later on, Wilhelm is in the middle of a defusing process when he feels nauseous and vomits on the landmine. As a consequence, the landmine explodes, blowing both of his hands. Seeing this, some boys hurriedly carry the crying Wilhelm and take him to the sergeant, who then sends him to a field hospital. That same night, all the boys experience severe stomach ache due to the food that Helmut brought the previous night from a nearby barn. When Carl shows up in the morning, Helmut immediately admits his fault, prompting the sergeant to inspect the barn. Upon doing so, it turns out that Helmut has stolen the rat feces and grain, mistaking it as food. With this realization, Carl makes the boys purge themselves with seawater in order to rid their bodies of the toxic food. Afterwards, Sebastian presents Carl with a wooden frame, explaining that it'll make their work much easier. However, The sergeant dismisses the idea and orders him to go to bed. On the following day, Carl visits the field hospital to check on Wilhelm's condition. Once there, a nurse sadly informs him that Wilhelm has succumbed to his injuries. This news saddens the sergeant, and he feels bad for the German boys. After this, he goes to their base camp and steals some food before returning back. Upon arriving at the West Coast, Carl begins to treat his charges more kindly. He wakes up the boys and offers them the food. The boys are finally able to fill up their stomach after such a long gap. Shortly after, he tells them of the good and bad news. Starting with the positive news, he states that he visited the field hospital and lies that Wilhelm is recovering well. However, the bad news is that they are already falling behind schedule with their work, so they now have to defuse 8 landmines per hour to catch up. Back at work, Carl allows the boys to use the wooden frame invented by Sebastian in order to improve their productivity. While the others continue defusing the landmines, Werner, Ernst and Ludwig carry the defused mines to the grassy field atop a hill. After a whole day of work, the boys return to their hut and rest. During the nighttime, Captain Ebb, who has heard the rumors about Carl stealing food for the boys, brings a group of British soldiers to abuse and torment the Germans. Upon hearing the commotion, Carl walks out and tries to stop the soldiers, citing that they need the boys to wipe out the entire coast. Ebb stops, but he takes the sergeant to have a little chat in private. The captain accuses him of being sympathetic towards the Germans and stealing food for them. Carl claims that he took the food for himself and his dog, not for the boys. However, Ebb remains unconvinced and points out that Carl is receiving enough money to afford sufficient food for him. The next day, during work, Ernst discovers that the landmines are buried one on top of another. He hurriedly calls out to his twin brother to warn him, but Werner doesn't hear the warning and tragically blows himself up. Terrified, Ernst rushes to find his brother, but he is nowhere to be found. Despite this, he is not ready to accept his brother's death, even after being comforted by the sergeant. Seeing his disturbed state, Carl takes him back to the hut and asks him to take a rest, assuring that they will find his brother tomorrow. Afterwards, Carl approaches Sebastian, who is gazing at the sunset. He confides in him that he has not been truthful with the boys, and that Wilhelm has passed away. In response, Sebastian reveals that he is already aware of this. He also says that what Carl did was understandable, as he did not want the boys to lose hope. As their conversation unfolds, Sebastian injects some humor, and the two gradually establish a warm and friendly connection. The following day, Carl pays a visit to the base camp, and again brings food for the boys. He grants them a leave from their work, allowing them to enjoy the beach. He even joins them in a casual game of football, reveling in the joy of the moment. In the midst of this, 2 additional German prisoners arrive there to join them in their mission of defusing landmines. Ludwig welcomes them and invites them to join in their fun. After their football match, they engage in a friendly race, while Ernst is seen playing alone with a mouse he found in the grassy field. In the next scene, the group makes their way back to the hut. On their way, Carl tosses a ball towards a supposedly cleared zone of the beach and orders his dog to retrieve it. But unfortunately, the dog triggers a landmine and is fatally wounded. This incident leaves the sergeant heartbroken and thinks that it's the boys' irresponsibility. Ludwig, who was assigned to clear that area, asserts that he had indeed disarmed all the landmines and counted it twice to confirm, but Carl still believes that he miscounted. Unfortunately, he loses his temper and once again starts mistreating the boys. He claims that he made a big mistake by trusting them. Amidst this tense atmosphere, Helmut begins to laugh, provoking the rage of the sergeant. Believing that he is mocking him, Carl delivers some hard slaps to him and warns him against repeating it. Following this, he forces them to line up and march close together across the cleared zones of the beach in order to confirm that they are safe. Later in the day, the boys are resting in their huts after work when Helmut makes a bold decision to run away. He tries to persuade the others to do the same because they won't survive here in this way. However, the rest of the boys refuse to follow his suit. Sebastian, acting as the group's leader, firmly instructs Helmut to remove such ideas from his mind, asserting that they will be staying there until their job is done. Helmut refuses to comply and decides to leave alone. Faced with no other option, Sebastian and his comrades restrain Helmut in his bed and place a ball in his mouth to keep him quiet. A short while later, the local little girl's mother comes running into the hut, and pleads for the boys' help to save her daughter. The boys promptly follow the woman to the restricted area on the beach, where they find the girl playing. Meanwhile, Carl arrives at the hut and discovers only Ernst. After inquiring about the whereabouts of the other boys, the sergeant proceeds toward the beach, where he finds the boys helping the local woman in her daughter's rescue. A few moments later, Ernst arrives at the scene and walks towards the girl without thinking of the mines. He calms the girl by engaging in playful interaction, while Sebastian clears a path for her safe rescue. Eventually, Sebastian reaches the girl, and Ernst passes her over to him. However, Ernst refuses to return back and instead walks forward through the uncleared minefield. Because of this, he meets the same tragic fate as his twin brother. Witnessing this, Carl becomes emotional and starts treating the boys kindly. He later approaches the grieving Sebastian and reassures him that they will soon be able to go home. He also says that the group needs Sebastian, so he needs to stay strong. From the next day onward, the boys continue their mine clearance work, with Carl also helping them in finishing their task quickly. One day, the four boys, Sebastian, Ludwig, Helmut, and Rodolph, continue clearing the beach along with the sergeant, while the rest of them load unexploded mines onto a truck. During this, one of the boys inadvertently tosses a mine that was not properly defused onto the truck bed of deactivated mines. This results in a catastrophic chain reaction that claims the lives of all 7 members of the group. Witnessing this tragic event, Carl and the 4 surviving boys rush to the site of the explosion but find no trace of their comrades. This devastating incident leaves the survivors deeply traumatized. In the next scene, Carl fulfills his promise and sends the remaining boys home in a truck after successfully clearing all the landmines. After this, the sergeant returns to the base camp to speak with Ebb. Much to his shock, Ebb tells him that he has sent the 4 German boys to another minefield to join another group of Germans to defuse more landmines. This new field presents even greater risks as they lack a map, and there are a daunting 72,000 mines to be defused. Enraged by this revelation, Carl asks Ebb to allow the 4 boys to return home, as he had already promised them. However, the captain shows no sympathy and claims that all the Germans must stay until all the mines are cleared. Fueled by anger and determination, Carl decides to defy orders and drives towards the new minefield. He retrieves the 4 boys and drives them towards the German border. Once they are 500 meters away from the border, Carl instructs the boys to run away. The movie ends with the sergeant watching the boys run to their freedom.